Hey everyone, it's Nathan, and today I'm going to show you how I mix a wall of sound. Now, with the wall of sound, this is a really common thing in dance music. It's where you hit the drop and you've been listening. You're like, oh my God, is the drop coming? Is it coming? And it comes and it's just this full kind of chorus that just floors you. And so I'm going to show you how I mix this in real time. Now, if I'm being honest, I actually already really like where this is at, but I haven't formally mixed it yet. I kind of just mixed it as I was going along, and I'm pretty lazy when it comes to mixing as I am composing a track. I like to just kind of do as little as possible, really get the samples to fit well together, because if you're really trying to get these samples and these synths that to begin don't really fit well together, and you're like doing all these dramatic EQs and distortions and compressions, whatever kind of sound design things you might do to get them to fit together, you're really making it a lot harder on yourself. And that really just goes into the sound design stage. As far as I'm concerned, I think that you should do sound design on a separate day. So to start things off, we're going to play the track as it is, and so you guys can hear it, and then we'll jump right in. So let's start right now. Okay, so there it is. That's what we've got. Now, to start things off, I want to show you guys the layers that I've got, because I need to kind of reorient myself too so that I know what I'm dealing with here. So really the main things that are going on in this chorus is you've got a kick up here, wherever it is. There it is. You've got a kick, which is just like a standard. It's basically like a standard sine wave that you've pitched down. You can use Nicky Romero's kick. You can use this tool, which is my preferred one, just because I'm familiar with it. I don't think it's as versatile as the other one, but this one, I'm all about simplicity. So you've got a kick, and then you have a snare, which is two claps layered together. So there's probably a thicker, kind of more snarey one in here. I don't know which one it is. So that's your more snare sound. And then here you've got, that's more of like a crunchy clap, and then they layer together and you get this. It sounds very Seven Lions-esque, actually. I'm surprised I wasn't even like trying to copy him. But you listen to enough things and they just start showing up in your music. And you're like, wow, that's pretty cool. And then you have a simple hi-hat ride. Simple stuff. So the fun part is the layering. So I'm going to start from the ground up, which is with our bass. Now our bass, I got really lazy, but it fit perfectly. It's just a typical saw wave. So we're going to listen to it and you'll hear it's just a saw wave. Nothing special. Just a saw wave, but when you start to layer it with these things, these are kind of chords that are all layered together to create that wall of sound, you'll hear how it just kind of fills in some space, makes it denser, makes it fuller. So let's listen to our first kind of chord synth. Okay, so I can already tell if there's another chord that has a little mid-range or more mid-range in it, I can actually take out of this synth. So we might come back to it later for that. And then we'll listen to our next layer, which is a kind of, I think it was just like a plain violin. So pretty cool. So if you layer those two together, you get something like this. That's pretty cool. And then I've got a more kind of typical saw chord to give it more kind of forwardness, because those two chords I just played for you are a little more kind of like, they kind of just fill things out. They're not as forward as this saw chord's going to be. So if you play them all together, you get this. That's pretty cool. There's a final touch on this kind of chord, which is just that you put noise on top of it, because noise fills things out. It makes things sound fuller. If you get to like a part where you're making a wall of sound and you're like, well, I've put a lot of instrumentation in, I feel like it's already done, but it's missing something. Usually noise is kind of like the poor man's way of filling that space out. So we're just going to play the noise. That's just standard noise. What I did here was I delayed the right channel by 20 milliseconds so that it has a Hawes effect, which is basically it's like a pseudo stereo effect. It's pretty cool, but that's all that's happening. And then so when you play those all together, and we'll include the bass now so you can hear it, this is going to be your full kind of wall of sound. Actually, not the full. It's going to be one, because we're missing our lead. It's going to be 1/5 or 6th of our, it's 1/6 or it's 5/6 of our wall of sound. So you're going to hear the bed that everything kind of sits on, and it's going to be pretty cool. And then you have our lead, which sits on top of that bed. And your lead isn't anything special. It's just like a square. It could be a it could be a saw wave or a sine wave. A square wave that is going to have some LFO modulation on either your pitch, or you could actually put it on the phase of an oscillator. If you move the phase fast enough with an LFO, you get the same kind of distortion, or very similar kind of distortion. Really cool. I don't think they're that different, honestly, and it is just a preset that I used, because I've been through that phase where I had to sound design everything and I didn't get much done. So I just started using presets, and a lot of them happen to be mine. So now that we've heard everything, I want to dive right into our wall of sound, the bed that everything sits on, because I can hear that between our 3 chords here, which I'm going to change the color of to blue, so that we can identify them a little bit better. With these 3 chords, there seems to be just a little bit of overlap in what each of them is doing, which is okay. You can do that. But if you're not careful, that overlap can become muddy somewhat quickly. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to listen to these chords, and we're going to identify what each chord does specifically. We're going to write a note about it, and then we'll move forward with that. So that chord is just, it's soft, it's gentle. That chord is more, our violin chord is more mid-rangey and forward. Mid-range faux. All right, and then our saw chord is obviously going to be very forward. And the noise is primarily designed for forwardness. Noise faux. Awesome labeling. Anyway, so let's listen to everything, and then I'll jump where my intuition takes me. Okay, so I'm hearing something that is somewhere between 140 hertz and about 500, maybe 600 hertz. It's just like there's something I could notch out that would it would kind of make everything sound a little bit clearer while also still giving it that wall of sound effect. So I'm gonna look at our violin, our mid-rangey violin here, and we're gonna look at that. We're gonna look at our EQ actually. Here we go. So we've got this. We're gonna solo it. So I've identified the culprit by soloing until the problem went away, which is our mid-rangey forward violin. So we're going to go to work there. We're going to play everything as we do that. We're going to look at an EQ here, which we already had up. And, well, it's not high-passed. So we're going to high-pass it. Cool. So I fixed it with a high pass at about 250. That takes away that problem, which was just like a little bit of like the body that the violins had. We don't need that in our wall of sound since our bass is pretty much taking care of that for us. Let's listen again, see what else we can do. Okay, so I'm tempted to see how much I can remove from the top end, just to kind of push all of our kind of wall of sound a little bit further back. Now, there's an easy way to do this, which is to take all of your wall of sound elements, which I believe are already sent to the same bus, which is, yeah, to bus them. You want to bus them. And then at the bus or the group where all the audio is being sent to, you can actually do that EQ right there so that you don't have to, go to the individual elements, which could all have a little bit of top end that you're trying to remove over here, and do the same thing. And even though doing that individually can give you more control, honestly, you can get the same job done in 80% of cases. You can do it by just bussing them and making the adjustment on just one EQ. So I discovered the problem. There's a candle in here. I love the smell of it, but it makes my throat just get all just messed up. So, but now it's too late. It's coated the walls with its amazing scent, and so it could be asbestos. We don't know. We hope it's not asbestos. That would be horrible. Anyway, so let's. What are we doing? We got sidetracked talking about asbestos and mesothelioma. Do you have a mesothelioma? Would you like to call a lawyer right now to have us not fix your mesothelioma, but get you medication or money to fix your cancer, which can't be fixed because it's bad cancer? Anyway. Oh man, that's horrible. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to listen to everything, and we're going to just make a small EQ adjustment in this top end of our wall of sound. And we're going to see how it influences the way that our lead sits on top of everything. Because that's why we're pushing this wall of sound back. When I called it a bed, that's really how I think about it. It's like a bed for our lead to lay on. I'm sure there's some better metaphors, but that's how I think about it. You might want to find your own metaphor. Maybe like it could be like a white wall, and in the center of it is this kind of like bold, minimal, just black dot, and that's your art, just a black dot on a white canvas. Anyway, so let's listen to everything and then make this adjustment, and we'll see how it fits. So that's a pretty good start. You'll notice I made 3 EQ adjustments, one down here in the kind of mid-range. That just sounded better, removing some of that woolliness that opened up more space for our saw wave bass. And then I just removed some frequencies at 1.5 kilohertz and 5 kilohertz. And that's just to give more space for our lead to just be a little more forward. Like I said, I don't think it's necessary, but since I kind of want the focus on the lead, I don't want it to be so clusterfucked by our amazing wall of sound in this particular case. That's just what I feel sounds best, and so that's pretty much what I made right there. Now, the last thing I might fool around with is a low-pass filter on our wall of sound. So we're going to see how that works. It may not work, but we want to experiment. That's part of mixing, is experimenting, seeing what you like. And so that we can actually see how everything turns out at the end. I actually have a before version of this wall of sound that I'm going to play at the end, and you guys can listen to the before and then all the EQ adjustments I've made here. So we'll have like a nice comparison there. All right, so let's listen and fool around with this low pass filter. Well, I like that without the low pass filter, since you want it to kind of, you want your drop to be a little more kind of droppy, which means it's aggressive, it's forward, it's energetic. So if you subtract these kind of higher frequencies here, it kind of gets rid of that a little bit. So if you wanted a more mellow drop or something that was more mellow, say for example, for a vocal to fit on top of it, that would be perhaps a really good choice to make. So that's pretty much what we've done there with our wall of sound mixing. And now let's look at fine-tuning our lead. Now we're going to slap an EQ on our lead. You'll notice there's a reverb on there. Actually, before we go into this, with our wall of sound chords, these 3 blue chords here, none of them are being sent to a reverb because this one, they all had reverb on them. They all had room tone, and when they got mixed together, to me it sounded fine. Now, in some cases, you might send these all to a reverb, and because this wall of sound is being sidechained, which means it's pumping when the kick hits, because that's happening, you would then send the reverb to the group that we have here, where we did our little EQ adjustment. And on this group that everything is being sent to, there's a sidechain, which compresses everything. Because usually with a reverb that's on a wall of sound, you'd want to sidechain that as well. Sometimes you might want like individual control, which means you'd have like a separate sidechain on it. But in this one, I did it all on one channel, which to me sounds great. So we're going to go back to our lead, which does have its own reverb on it. And the reverb is just a standard kind of medium tail reverb, just at like 40% wetness. And it sounds pretty good, just standard stuff on Valhalla, which is like the best. Honestly, it's just a great reverb. I love it. I don't know what I would do without it because it makes things so simple, and the presets rock. It's better than most reverbs out there that are like $200 or more. And I own some of those reverbs, and I don't use them nearly as much. So we're going to listen to our lead as it plays with everything. And what we're going to do is we're going to see if we can't just make our lead sit better with the bed that we've made for it. And we'll kind of see how that turns out. So we're going to play everything right now. Okay, so that's our first move, which I didn't use a high-pass filter just because this is our lead, and with leads I often find that when I want to get rid of low end, I tend to use a shelf as opposed to a more aggressive high-pass filter. However, in many situations, I get away with a high-pass filter as well. So it all works. It's all pretty cool. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to focus more on our mid-range and getting the top end of our lead to just work a little better with the wall of sound that we've made for it to sit on top of. So that sounds pretty cool to me. What I've done here is I just made some very minor adjustments to push our lead a little further back, because as you heard it with the reverb, it just gives it this kind of very large room hall-like sound. And since that's kind of what I was going for when I made it, I've pushed it further back so that we have a little more focus on our wall of sound, and that now that element's more in the back of our mix as well. If this was a more forward element and the wall of sound was in the back, I would be reversing that approach. I'd be doing this kind of low pass filter to the wall of sound. But since I want the wall of sound of chords and noise to be more forward, I've done what I've done here. So that's what we've got so far. I'm going to give it another listen to see how I like it, and we'll see if we can't do anything else. I'm also going to be messing with my limiter here so that I can hear how it boosts as it goes louder. And what you might notice is that in the before and after, the before version is definitely going to have more top end, which is cool. That's great. The reason that you find that you subtract a little more top end as you mix things together is because when you get to limiting, where you start to boost things louder and louder, that top end can quickly become overwhelming. Whereas your mid-range, our ears are much more tolerant of mid-range, boosting in volume. So we get to feel that boost in power, which is what the mid-range does anyway. You feel the boost in power as your volume goes up. Whereas if you kept all this top end, you'd feel the boost in power, but your ears would start to get really fatigued by all this top end. Kind of like when asshole DJs like to turn the filter for their high frequencies up in the club so that it energizes the dance floor. And God forbid you're ever in a club with one who just doesn't have any top end hearing in his ear and he turns it like all the way up. It was horrible, horrible cabaret. It was like a cabaret style place in Morocco. Anyway, so that's what we've got. We've got this so far. I'm going to play with the limiter now to see how it sounds as it goes up in volume, to see how I like it. And then we're going to finish by showing you a before and after, which is I have a before bounce of our track, and I'm going to play it, and we're going to compare it against what we've done here, and we're going to see which one we like more. Okay, so I want to work on my kick a little bit. I wasn't planning on working on any percussion here, but the kick is a little bit pokey because it is a synthesized kick. It's going to have a little more poke through, which is the advantage of using kick makers, because they use like a sine wave or some kind of waveform that allows you to control the kind of pitch timing as it sweeps down to the low end. So what we're going to do is we're going to listen to everything. Interesting that was. So we're going to listen to everything, and we'll just see if we can't get that kick to just still have the punch, but kind of there's like a low mid-rangey pokiness to it between 100 and 300 hertz, I think, which you can see I was already trying to deal with it here. And we're going to see if we can't just see if we can't push it back a little more. Just very subtly, though. Okay, so we made 2 EQ adjustments, which we're now going to test it with a limiter. I know this is like a pretty funky way of mixing, and I'm sure some engineers will be like, don't do that. Don't mix and then test your volume check. Now, I don't mix everything and then boost it with my limiter. I just tend to do some finishing touches. I often find that the kick tends to be one of the things that will poke out as it hits my limiter. And that's probably because as I'm mixing, I like to have a little bit louder. As I'm producing, I like to have a little bit louder of a kick because it's more motivating. It just kind of, since kick is king, it drives everything. So we're going to pump our limiter up and see how it fits. Okay, so I like where that kicks at. I need to turn our limiter down so I can do this and then save our session, which is just, I have this habit of Control-S-ing because I used to work in Ableton, which is a wonderfully buggy program when you use external VSTs with it. So it would crash like a lot of DAWs. It would crash all the time, and it would have amazing plugin delay compensation, which was just totally fabulous. So I eventually just realized that the plugin delay compensation was too good for me, so I moved on to something else that had, more average plugin delay compensation so that things were actually in time after I put plugins on it. Anyway, so moving on, we're going to look at our claps. Since now that we've mixed everything, these claps are a little bit aggressive. Now I'm going to pop an EQ on each one of these, and we're going to just EQ these at the same time. I have 2 windows up at the same time so that we can see what's going on here. Now I need to listen to these claps so I know what I'm dealing with. That's interesting. What did I just run into? Pretty sure this right EQ should not be having anything go into it because that track is muted. Whatever. Anyway, so we know that this first one is our more kind of like chunky clap. And then this second one that's our snare, which looking at the EQ, you can see that it has that snare bump at 200 hertz like all snares tend to have. So right off the bat, we're going to high pass that snare at about 100 because you don't need that. We're also going to play the other clap as well. We're going to high pass that too because we don't need this energy down here. And so now we're going to play everything, and then we're going to make some EQ adjustments to these as we move forward. So I like where that's at now. I EQ these separately. Now, my original kind of inclination was to be lazy, send them to a group, and then just mix them together because that's a lot easier. However, with layered claps, if you only have two, you can generally be pretty picky about what you're doing. So what I did is I just subtracted some frequencies I thought were adding up a little too much. With our clap in particular, the chunky clap, which isn't our snare, it just had a little too much at the top end at 8 kilohertz, which I also subtracted nearby from our snare, but the snare is filling that space out. We don't need the clap to do it. The clap was mainly being used for these frequencies between 400 and about 2 kilohertz. There, you actually saw me fool around with the range at about 1 kilohertz, where, you know, that's where the clap has this kind of chunkiness. It has kind of like a resonance there, which if in a more advanced way, if I really wanted to control that, and in fact, we're going to do it, I would put a multiband compressor on that range so that I hear that range for as long as I want to. Right now, it has a little too much sustain. It's not snappy enough. And by snappy, I don't mean like the transient. It's a bad word choice. I mean that in terms of time, the resonance of that clap lasts for too long. And I don't like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a multiband compressor on there. And this is one of these kind of more advanced things that you can do. Totally not necessary. But when you get to a point where you're like, I got to have that control, you end up doing weird things like pulling out multiband compressors and being like, okay, it's time for the multiband compressor. I'm going to master nothing. Because like 8 times out of 10, you use a multiband compressor, it was pointless, or you just didn't need it. And then the other 2 times, it's like a miraculous solution. So it's hit or miss, but you got to test things out to find out what you want to do. So let's listen to everything and we'll see if we can't configure this. Cool. So what I've got happening here is I've just configured the multi-band awesome compressor at about 400 hertz to 4 kilohertz. And what's really happening here is it's like a single band compressor. I'm pretty much just having the compressor, when that clap hits, actually the best way to think of this, the way I'm using this multiband compressor, is I'm using it as a selective EQ. What that means is that instead of having an EQ that's always taking away 2 dB of volume, I have this one set up so that once this range is filled with that energy that I want to reduce the volume of, my selective or dynamic EQ waits for quarter second to half second before it completely removes that energy. So I get to hear that energy come through initially, which I want, and then the EQ acts fast enough that it subtracts that energy so that I don't hear it anymore. So it's a dynamic EQ. Really, I mean, when I think of multiband compressors, I think of them as dynamic EQs. I don't think of them as like, oh, I'm compressing, which in and of itself, compression is pretty nebulous, because I remember when I first learned about compression, I was like, I just use it on everything. And that's how I got really good at it. And now that I know what compression's for, I barely ever use it, which is really funny because I used it all the time and it just made things more complicated. And eventually I'm going to release some tutorials on simplifying compression so that you know when to use it, because it's a great tool to have in your arsenal. As a matter of fact, I heard somebody else describe compressors as automatic volume faders, which if you go back to the selective EQ example or the dynamic EQ that I just told you about, it pretty much is an automatic volume fader on this specific range. And I can control the time properties of how fast that volume fader goes down and how long it takes to go down. That's what a multiband compressor does. Now, obviously, you can get into expansion and upwards compression and and upwards expansion with this particular tool, but those again are more advanced things that you really don't need to concern yourself with. If you don't know what they do, it's not going to change. It's not going to make you a pro. It's just an added level of control. There are tons of producers who make amazing music. They don't even touch these things because they're like, what's the point? Like, do you need that much control to make great music? No, it's just a shortcut of sorts, but it doesn't become a shortcut until you really learn how to use it. And the way you learn how to use it is you just fool around with them. And there is no perfect solution with a multiband compressor. There's many different solutions that can get you to the same point. And once you have that in mind, you start to be okay with the fact that, okay, I'm using this compressor and this may not be the best range that I've set it at, but it's a range that I like and it achieves somewhere closer to where I wanted it to be. So that's like a little tangent on multiband compression. So we're going to listen to everything. I'm going to boost the volume again and see how everything sounds. You'll have to excuse me for a second. I need water. All this asbestos is making me very thirsty. Okay, so I like to, when I do this volume adjustment with my limiter, I like to do it for as short a period as possible, because the longer you listen to high volume, the more it messes up your ears. In terms of when you go back to the low volume, part of why I'm talking right now, so that my ears can readjust. When you go back to the low volume, your ears are like, well, this fucking sucks, because the party's over. All that energy is just gone. Anyway, so we've made it to the final part. If you've stayed with us this long, obviously you're committed to listening to a bunch of tangents and learning how to mix more simply. And also to master this wall of sound thing, which, before I show you the before and after, when it comes to engineering a wall of sound, if we go back to all these elements, you'll notice that it's a lot of relatively thin things that add up to create our wall of sound, which, they add up to create our wall of sound. So we have our saw wave, which is just a plain saw wave. A saw wave is a lot like white noise. It's great for filling in space. There's nothing wrong with using a saw wave. Obviously there might be like times where, you look over at your part over here and for some reason that is just not where it should be, so you fix it. But, sometimes you find that a saw wave can get you the same result. In fact, saw waves and sine waves and triangle waves and square waves are great starting points for sound design. If you don't know what to do for a part, just put a saw wave in. Put a piano in. Put something basic, because if you can't get it to sound the way that you want with a basic waveform, how do you think you're going to fare when you put something complicated in there that has like spectral waveforms and like modulation just everywhere? How do you think you're going to manage that? So really, once you get something sounding the way you want with a basic waveform, I could come back here and I could pull up Spire or Dune, which has a wavetable in there, and do some wavetable synthesis, which would give me something more potentially I'd go for something growly or FM sounding, which is just a more distorted bass like what you hear in dubstep, which I don't know if it would work as well with this, because if I made a bass like that, then I would have to take more from my chords so that it could fit in better because it's got more frequencies. So coming back to our bass, it's just a simple saw wave, which really, if you listen to that, it's just really just some nice warm sub with some upper harmonics, and then there's like a presence at 1 kilohertz, and then it just fades out. And then if you look at our chords, you have this chord here, which is thin. It's thin and airy, and then it layers with our violin. The violin just makes it thicker, more lush. And then you have our saw chord, which if you look in here, I did some really complicated engineering. I just took 8 saw waves, 8 voices for it, layered them together, and then detuned them slightly, and then panned them with spread. Oh, and then I put like a little bit of distortion on them. That's it. Oh, and then I put a phaser in. Okay. Yeah, but I mean, if you look at this, there's no complex modulation in here. This is some pretty dirty, simple sound design. Like, this is what sound design is. It's like, what's the simplest way to get what you want? All I did was like, okay, I need a saw wave. And I'm like, all right, I think I want to distort it. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. Let's put a phaser on there because it's cool. And then let's put some chorus, and that's it. That's all I did. Nothing complicated, just simple. And then you go and you look at like presets and you see all these things happening because a sound designer probably wasn't making a song when he needed to make that sound. Because when you want to make a sound to order, if you're trying to do like full-on sound design, it's just a different room in your mind. For a lot of people, it's a difficult room to get out of to go back to arranging and composing. So I try to not do too much sound design as I'm composing. I will have separate days where I do sound design. And then so that's our saw wave there. Don't remember if I played it, but let's listen to it. That's cool. And then we layered noise on top of there to give it fullness, and we'll play our bass as well. And really notice how that bass fills out frequency ranges within the other elements. It doesn't just fill out the bass, doesn't just fill out the mid-range. Because it's a saw wave, it's adding harmonics all the way up through the spectrum. But it's doing it at the harmonic points that a bass would do it. So it fills everything out. It just gives it a nice fullness. Really cool. And then you have our lead. Now that lead is just thin, high-pitched by itself. If you just had to listen to that, you would go fucking crazy. It would drive you absolutely crazy. It's kind of annoying by itself, in my opinion. Like I listen to it, I'm like, what? That's horrible. But with everything else, because of contrast, the way our ears compare things, it sounds pretty cool. It also cuts through the mix really well. It's part of why it's annoying. So that's everything. And then, I never showed you the sidechaining. So I know I'm jumping around here, but I didn't plan this out. I wanted to show you in real time. And in real time, when you're mixing, you go all over the place, wherever your ears or your intuition or your muse or some angelic figure that guides you along, wherever they take you, that's where you go. So with the sidechain, everything from our lead all the way to our bass, everything that forms the wall of sound, which includes the lead in this case, is being sidechained by the same sidechain. And it's triggered by our kick, And what you're going to find is that I'm not sure how much gain reduction is happening on it, but you'll notice that there's some amount that causes everything to pump. So let's listen to it, and we're going to enable and disable that sidechain. We're going to start with it disabled. So I've used really heavy sidechaining on those elements to give that pump effect when the kick comes through. It's really heavy, but relatively quick. It takes about 171 milliseconds for all that volume that was taken away when the kick hits to come back to the original volume. So you get that nice pumping effect. And I heard it, there's a sidechain on the bass as well, an individual sidechain, just because I wanted the bass to pump even more. This is a personal taste thing. And I put it before an EQ, which is totally not necessary. You always like to have your compressor after an EQ. Well, actually, it's a general rule. With, like, do you compress before or after an EQ? Like, that's its own debate. I can tell you for now, if you're wondering whether you should or compress before or after EQing, compress after EQing. In 90% of cases, you're compressing after you EQ because you want the compressor compressing the signal that you've already treated. If the compressor is responding to a signal that you haven't touched with your EQ, then you're not configuring your EQ you're not configuring your compressor based on what you've EQ'd. And since EQ always happens before compression, 99% of times, all the time, you should always EQ before you compress. Just that's how it works. The order of mixing is its own thing, which I'll probably do in another tutorial. The kind of order that I follow. If you guys are curious about that, let me know. I'll tell you guys like the order of like what's the first thing that I go for, the second thing, the third thing, the fourth thing. Because I know that if you watch this is a little bit more of an advanced tutorial. I'm all over the place because I'm just showing you how I do it in real time. And that's a creative process, so naturally you're just boom, 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 wherever you want to go. So, getting to the part that I prefaced earlier, which was showing you our before version, what we're going to do now is we're going to listen to our before wall of sound, and you'll notice I disabled some things on the master, and that's because those would influence the tone of it very slightly. I don't want you to hear that. So, we're going to listen to our original wall of sound. And what we're going to do actually is we're going to have it set up so that the first thing that you hear is actually rather, we can't do that. It's too complicated. I apologize. Sort of, not really. Technology just does things. You can't control it sometimes, even though it's just ones and zeros, whatever that means. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to play our original version, and I really want you guys just to, if you can, pay attention mentally. Obviously, since you're watching a video, you can come back to this part, and you can listen to it and A-B it with the other part that we're going to be playing after. So we're going to listen to this part, and this is the original version. Oh, did you hear that? Did you hear how I actually muted the original, and I went to the one that we worked on, and you may have noticed, you're like, oh fuck, that's horrible. It sounds quieter. It's like not as loud. So you would think this first one sounds better, but that's because of perceived volume. Again, we're thinking in terms of it's a wall of sound. You want to play it loud to people. You don't want them to be annoyed when they hear it. So you got to think in terms of, okay, I don't want the ear being overwhelmed. So if we adjust for perceived volume, we go to our original kind of track here, we'd probably boost it by about, I'd say, 2-3 dB. Okay, so that is our final version, which in my opinion, I think sounds way better. Things have opened up. It's just cleaner. But like I said, when we first started, I was like, I don't really think I need to touch this, but I did want to see how great could I make it, because mixing is, it's an art. You just kind of sit down, you do it, see what happens. Again, I really want to listen to this because I like how it turned out. It's really cool. Let's listen to it again. That's cool. That's so cool. So in my comparing the original versions, the one that we did together here, it's more open. That low mid-range 400 hertz down to 100 hertz is cleaned up. It's not as, it's just not as mushy. It was kind of mushy and just unclear when we started. And then also our hi-hat has actually become a little more detailed. Since it's going during the mix, you kind of want it driving since it's on the offbeat. It's nice to be able to hear that. It's a really nice, just offbeat amplification. I was thinking syncopation, but I don't know if that qualifies as syncopation, but it's a really cool word. It's very nicely syncopated. Yeah, I was playing on the bongos. It's very cool at the club. Anyway. Oh man, just playing bongos with a beret. You're pretty cool when you play bongos with a beret. So if you want to become the next hit DJ, get a beret, play bongos on top of dance music. People will love you. It's the new thing. Or just, make pop music, which we are actually I love pop music actually. When I first started, I did not like pop music. I was like, fuck pop music. I make dance music. But I actually studied pop music is in just so genius. Pop music, if you want to learn arrangement that just draws people in, study pop music. There's a reason it catches in people's minds and they can't forget those songs that you might think are annoying. I'm looking at that one song. It goes like, watch me whip, now watch me nan. Soldier Boy 2.0. Anyway, so smart song though. Anyway, so that's all for the tutorial. I hope that helped you guys understand how a wall of sound is put together. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. And if you're curious about some other tutorials, let me know what you'd like to learn about, because I know there's a lot of stuff to learn. In the future, I'll probably release some more detailed tutorials on compression and multiband compression. So, look forward to the next one. Have a good one, guys.